The first time my son-in-law looked at me like I was furniture. I was holding a casserole dish with both hands, standing in the foyer of his new house in Greenwich, and he didn't bother to take his earbuds out. He just nodded once and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving me with my wife's old Pyrex and a pair of muddy boots I didn't know whether to take off or not. I made a choice in that moment. I told myself it didn't matter. He was young. He was busy. My daughter loved him. None of those things turned out to be a good enough reason. My name is Edmund Caro. I'm 68 years old. I live in a small ranch house in Westport, Connecticut, with a roof that needs replacing and a fence I've been meaning to paint since 2019. I drive a 2008 Silverado with a cracked taillight. My wife Helen passed 3 years ago this March, lung cancer, the kind that doesn't ask questions and doesn't take excuses. We were married for 39 years. I have one daughter, Caroline, and one grandson, a boy named Sam, who turned 8 in August. Sam's father is a man named Garrick Holloway. He's 36. He runs a private equity outfit in Stamford, and the first time I met him, he asked me what kind of return I was getting on my retirement account. I told him I didn't have one in the way he meant. I had a federal pension and a paid-off house, and a savings account at a credit union. He smiled at me the way a man smiles when he's already decided you're not worth a follow-up question. I want to tell this the way it happened, not the way I rehearsed it in my head afterward. Because for almost 2 years I rehearsed it. I lay awake on the couch with the TV on mute and ran the conversations back, looking for the exact moment I should have said something different. I never found that moment. The truth is the moment came later, and when it came I knew what to do. And that's the part of this story that matters. Caroline met Garrick at a charity event in the city 6 years ago. She was working in fundraising for a hospital then, the way she'd always wanted to since she was a girl. Garrick wrote a check for the gala that had a number on it. I couldn't process at the time. He asked her to dinner the next week. By Christmas, they were engaged. The wedding was at his family's compound on the north shore of Long Island. 200 guests, a string quartet during cocktails, and a tent that cost more than my truck has ever been worth. I wore a rented tuxedo. My collar was too tight. Helen squeezed my hand under the table during the toasts and whispered, "She looks happy, Ed." And that was good enough for me then. His father, a man named Spencer Holloway, did the welcome speech. He talked for 11 minutes about legacy. He used the word dynasty twice. He never said my daughter's name. When he finally got around to mentioning her, he called her the bride, and Helen squeezed my hand harder. I should explain something here, because if I don't, the rest of this won't make sense. For 31 years, I worked for the United States Treasury Department, in a division most people have never heard of, doing work I wasn't allowed to talk about at home. My family knew I worked for the government. They knew I traveled. Helen knew more than the rest because you can't be married to someone for 39 years and hide everything from them. But even she didn't know the specifics. Caroline grew up thinking her father was an accountant of some sort, a forensic one maybe, who consulted on financial cases. That's what I let her think. It was easier, and it was safer. There were people I'd helped put away who had long memories, and I never wanted my family to be a name in someone's notebook. I retired 4 years ago. I started doing crossword puzzles. I started fixing the things on the house Helen used to nag me about. Then she got sick, and then she was gone, and then the house got very quiet. Carolyn started inviting me up to Greenwich for Sunday dinners. That's where this really begins. The Sunday dinners were always at Garrick's house, never at mine, never at a restaurant, never anywhere I had any standing. I drove the 45 minutes up I-95. I parked behind whatever new car he'd bought that month, and I waited in the kitchen while Caroline finished cooking, and he finished whatever call he was on in his office. He had 4 offices in that house. I counted them once. One was a real office, one was a casual office, one was a library, and one was the room he took calls in. He'd say it like that. "I'll be in the room I take calls in." My whole house was smaller than his foyer. I want to be clear about something. I didn't dislike Garrick because he was rich. I've known plenty of men who had money and were decent. I disliked him because of how he talked to my daughter. He'd interrupt her mid-sentence and then get annoyed when she lost her train of thought. He'd order for her at restaurants without asking. He'd correct her in front of his friends. in that gentle, teasing voice that's actually the meanest voice a man has. And the thing that started to claw at me, the thing I lost sleep over, was that Sam was watching all of it. Sam is a thoughtful kid. He's small for his age, like Caroline was, and he reads books that are too old for him and asks questions about things 8-year-olds aren't supposed to think about. He asked me once, last spring, if it was rude to interrupt people. I said yes, it was. He said, but what if you do it all the time? Is it still rude? I knew exactly who he was thinking about. I told him yes, even more so. He nodded and went back to his book. The dinner I want to tell you about happened on a Sunday in late October. Caroline had been telling me for 2 weeks that Garrick's parents were going to be there, and that she really wanted me to come, and that it would mean a lot to her. Helen used to say that Caroline asked for things twice when she really meant them. She'd asked me 3 times. I went. I brought a bottle of wine. It was a decent bottle, $38, at the place near my house, the most I'd ever spent on wine in my life. Garrick's father took it from me at the door, glanced at the label, and set it down on a console table next to a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with a senator. He didn't say thank you. He said, "Edmund, isn't it? Caroline talks about you?" He said it like he was confirming a rumor. Spencer Holloway is 72. He's the kind of man who's been told he looks young for his age so many times he believes it. He had on a navy blazer with brass buttons and one of those watches that costs more than a used car, his wife Vivian. And yes, Caroline had told me her name a dozen times, and I'd practiced it in the truck on the drive up. Gave me a hug that wasn't really a hug. It was the shape of a hug. There was no contact at the shoulders. Sam was in the living room with a soccer ball, dribbling it back and forth between 2 armchairs. Spencer looked at him and said, "Boys playing inside. That's how things get broken." And then he said it again, louder, in case Sam hadn't heard the first time. Sam picked up the ball and held it against his chest and looked at his mother. Caroline said, "Honey, why don't you go play upstairs?" Sam went upstairs. He didn't run. He walked, very carefully. And that careful walk is what I remember most from the whole evening. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to walk that carefully in his own house. Dinner was at 7. The dining room had a chandelier that looked like it had been shipped in from somewhere. The table was set for 6, but it could have seated 12. I sat across from Vivian. Sam was next to me, and Caroline was between Sam and Garrick, and Spencer was at the head of the table, even though he didn't live there. Spencer led the conversation the way he probably leads board meetings. He talked about a property he was developing somewhere in Florida. He talked about a charity he was on the board of. He talked about his golf game. He looked at me 3 times during the entire meal, and each time it was to ask a question that wasn't really a question. "Edmund, you were what? Military?" "Treasury," I said. "Treasury. Like the IRS? Different department." "Huh," he said. He didn't follow up. He turned to Garrick and started talking about a deal they were both involved in. I ate my food. The food was good. I told Caroline so, and she smiled at me, and I saw the relief in her face that I wasn't pushing back, that I was being polite, that her father was being a guest. And that look on her face, that's what hurt. My daughter was relieved that I wasn't being a problem in my own son-in-law's house. Sam asked very quietly if he could have more bread. Spencer said, "What do we say?" Sam said, "Please." Spencer said, "The magic word didn't sound very magical, son. Try again." Sam said, "Please" again, louder. Spencer made him say it 3 times. Caroline laughed a small, uncomfortable laugh. The kind of laugh women make when they're hoping the moment will pass. Garrick didn't say anything. He was looking at his phone under the table. I set my fork down. I want to tell you what I felt right then, because it matters for the rest of this. I felt the thing I used to feel right before an operation went live, the slow, cold settling of everything, the narrowing down. I'd spent 31 years training myself to feel that and not show it, and I didn't show it that night either. I picked the fork back up and I ate my green beans, and I waited. After dinner, Spencer wanted brandy. Garrick poured it. Vivian asked Caroline about a bathroom renovation. Sam was allowed back downstairs, and he came in carrying a small wooden box. It was a chess set. It had been mine. I'd given it to him for his last birthday. It was the only thing of mine in that house. He came over to me and put it on the coffee table and asked if I'd play. Spencer said, "Chess at his age. Isn't that a little advanced?" I said, "He's been playing for 2 years." "He's pretty good." "Pretty good against who?" Spencer said. "Against you?" I said, "Yes, against me. He beat me last week." Spencer laughed. He looked at Garrick. "You hear that? Grandpa says the kid beat him at chess." Then he looked at Sam. "You probably let him win, didn't you, Edmund?" I said, "No, he won." "Sure," Spencer said. "Sure he did." Sam was setting up the pieces. He'd gotten quiet again. His ears were red. He set a pawn down and then picked it up and set it down again, like he wasn't sure where it went, and that's when I knew he was upset. Because Sam knows where a pawn goes. He's known since he was 6. Spencer leaned forward. He was a little drunk. The brandy was his 3rd drink. He said, "Let me see this set." Sam looked at me. I nodded once. Sam slid the box toward him. Spencer picked up the king. He turned it over in his fingers. He said, "What is this? Plastic?" "Wood," I said. "Hand-carved. It was my father's." "Doesn't look like much," he said. He set it down too hard. The king fell over. Sam reached out and stood it back up. Spencer reached past him and picked up a knight, and he was holding it in that careless way. Drunk men hold things, and I saw what was about to happen a half-second before it did. The knight slipped out of his fingers and hit the edge of the coffee table, and a piece of it broke off, a small piece, the curve of the horse's mane. It clinked onto the hardwood floor. Sam made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the sound a kid makes when something he loves gets hurt. Spencer said, "Oh, for God's sake, it's a piece of wood." I said, "It was my father's." He said, "Then your father had cheap taste, Edmund." The room went quiet. Vivian froze with her brandy glass halfway up. Caroline stopped breathing. I watched her stop breathing. Garrick looked up from his phone for the first time all night. I stood up. "I want you to understand, I wasn't going to do anything. I'd already decided that. I was going to stand up. I was going to thank Caroline for dinner. I was going to put my coat on, and I was going to drive home. That was my plan, and that was the plan I would have followed if Spencer had stopped there. Because, for all of it, for the treasury like the IRS, for the chess set, for ignoring my wine, for cheap taste, for all of that, I would have walked out and not come back. But Spencer wasn't done. He looked at Sam. He pointed at him with the broken knight in his hand. He said, "And you, stop crying over toys. You're being raised soft. Your father knows it. Your mother knows it. Hell, even your grandfather knows it. He just won't say it because he's the reason." Sam was crying now. Quietly, the way Sam cries. Spencer turned to me. He said, "You raised a daughter who married up. Good for you. But let's not pretend you've got anything to teach this boy. You worked a desk job, and you live in a house you can't afford to fix. Stay in your lane." I looked at Caroline. This is the part that broke me, because it's the part I keep coming back to. I looked at Caroline, and she looked at the floor. She didn't look at her son. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at her husband, who was still holding his phone. She looked at the floor, and that's how I knew this had happened before, in some form, with smaller things, on nights I didn't know about. My daughter had a way of looking at the floor when she was being talked over. I'd seen it her whole life, and I hadn't recognized it for what it was. I looked at Garrick. Garrick said, "Dad, come on, that's enough." But he said it lightly, the way you say enough when you don't really mean it, when you're going through the motions of being a husband and a father in front of company. He didn't stand up. He didn't go to his son. He went back to his phone within 5 seconds. I looked at Sam. Sam was holding the broken knight. The piece that had snapped off was on the floor by his shoe. He was trying not to cry harder. You could see him trying. I knelt down next to him. My knees aren't what they used to be. I picked up the broken piece. I closed my hand around it. I said, "Sammy, can you do me a favor and go get my coat from the front closet?" He nodded. He didn't say anything. He went. I stood up. I looked at Spencer. I said, very evenly, "I'm going to use the bathroom, and then I'm going to head home. Thank you for dinner, Caroline." Spencer said, "That's right. Run on home." I didn't answer him. I walked down the hallway past two of Garrick's offices into the powder room. I closed the door. I locked it. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, and I took my phone out of my pocket. I scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. Curtis Macklin. Kurt and I came up together at Treasury in '94. We'd worked the Hartford office, then D.C., then back to Hartford. He retired the year after I did, but he hadn't gone quiet the way I had. Kurt did consulting work for the Bureau now. He had access to systems I no longer had. He owed me about 4 favors that I'd never called in. He picked up on the third ring. "Eddie." "Jesus. Everything okay?" "Kurt. I need you to run a name." There was a pause. He'd known me a long time. He knew I didn't ask for things. He said, "Go." "Spencer Holloway," I said. "Lives in Locust Valley, Long Island. Real estate developer. Has a son in Greenwich, runs a PE fund called Holloway Bridge Partners. I want to know if anything's flagged. That a personal request? It's whatever you need it to be." He was quiet for a few seconds. I heard him typing. Then he said, "Eddie, I'm going to call you back in 20 minutes. Don't go anywhere." I came out of the bathroom. Sam was standing in the foyer holding my coat in both arms, like it was something fragile. I took it from him. I knelt down again. I uncurled my hand and showed him the broken piece of the night. I said, "This is going to be okay. I'm going to fix it. Wood glue and a clamp. You won't even see the seam." He whispered, "Grandpa, I'm sorry." I said, "Sammy, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing. Do you understand?" He nodded. I said, "I love you. I'll see you soon." I hugged him. Caroline was watching from the dining room doorway. She looked like she wanted to say something. She didn't say anything. I left. I sat in my truck in their driveway for 16 minutes. I didn't start the engine. I waited for Kurt to call back. The big house was lit up behind me, every window like a cruise ship. I didn't look at it. My phone rang at 8:47. Kurt said, "Eddie, where are you right now?" I said, "In my truck." "Why?" He said, "Get out of that driveway. Drive home. Don't stop. Don't take a call from anyone but me. Don't talk to your daughter tonight." I started the engine. I said, "What did you find?" He said, "I didn't find anything. I confirmed something. Spencer Holloway has been an active subject in a bureau investigation for 14 months. He's not the principal. He's a facilitator. There's a parallel investigation out of the Eastern District involving a series of structured purchases and shell entities he's tied to. The principal subjects are not people you want your family in proximity to." I asked who. He said a name I'm not going to repeat here. It was a name I knew from a case I'd worked in 2011. It was a name that had cost a young agent her career and almost her life. It was a name that should have been retired by now and wasn't. I drove home with both hands on the wheel. I want to be careful here, because I don't want this to sound like I made a decision that night out of vengeance. I didn't. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought about my grandson walking carefully up a staircase in his own house. I thought about my daughter looking at the floor. I thought about a man who'd called my father's hand-carved chess set cheap taste in front of a crying 8-year-old. And I thought about a name I knew from 2011 and what that name had done to people who weren't even in the business. I called Caroline's cell at 9:30. She didn't pick up. I left a message. "Caroline, call me when Garrick is asleep. It's important." She called back at 11:15. I said, "Honey, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm not going to explain everything tonight, but I need you to do something for me. Tomorrow morning after Garrick leaves for work, I want you to take Sam out of school early. Tell them it's a family matter. Drive to my house. Don't tell Garrick. Don't tell his parents. Pack an overnight bag for you and Sam, just in case. She said, Dad, what is going on? I said, I'll tell you when you get here. I need you to trust me. There was a long silence. Then she said, Is this about tonight? I said, Partly. Yes. She said, Dad, I am so sorry about tonight. I said, Caroline, stop. We'll talk about that. Just come tomorrow. She said, okay. Her voice was very small. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and I thought about Helen. I thought about what she would have said to me. Helen had a thing she used to say when I was working a hard case. She'd say, Ed, the thing about the right thing is it doesn't always feel right. I held on to that. Kurt called me at 6:14 the next morning. He said, the Hartford field office is moving. Today, they've been ready for 2 weeks. They were waiting on a piece, and last night, I gave them a reason to stop waiting. I said, what does that mean for my family? He said, your daughter and grandson are not subjects. They're not named. They were never named, but the warrant covers the Greenwich house too because there are documents and devices that have been tied to transfers there. They will be there before noon. You want them out of the house before that. Caroline pulled into my driveway at 9:40. Sam was in the back seat, still in his pajamas under his coat. She'd grabbed him out of bed. He had a backpack. His chest set was inside it. I saw it through the window. I made them breakfast. Eggs, toast, a sliced apple for Sam. I let Sam eat in front of the TV. I sat across from my daughter at the kitchen table, and I told her what was about to happen. I told her I used to work for Treasury, but not the way she'd thought, and that I'd made a phone call last night, and that the phone call hadn't started anything. It had only moved something that was already moving. I told her about the investigation. I told her, in general terms, who Spencer was tied to. I didn't give her the name. I said I couldn't. She listened. She didn't cry. She got very still, the way Helen used to get still when she was processing something hard. Then she said, Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? I said, because I didn't want anyone using you to get to me. She said, but I'm 41 years old. I said, I know. I should have told you sooner. I should have told you a lot of things sooner. I'm sorry. She put her hand on mine. She was looking at the table, not at me. She said, did you do this because of last night? I said, I did this because of last night. But I would have done it eventually. He's not a good man, Caroline. The investigation was already there. I just made a call, she said. Garrick. I said, I don't know yet. The Bureau hit the Greenwich house at 11:20. They hit Spencer's house at the same time. They hit Garrick's office in Stamford at 11:23. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Spencer was in custody. By 4 o'clock, the press had it. Because of course they did, because his father knew a senator and his name was on a building somewhere in Florida. Garrick was not arrested that day. He was interviewed, which is a different thing. He came home at 6 in the evening. Caroline was still at my house. He called her phone. She let it go to voicemail. He called again. She let it go again. She told her she didn't have to answer until she was ready. She answered the third call. She put it on speaker. He said, Caroline, where are you? She said, I'm at my dad's. He said, get home. Now, do you have any idea what's happening? She said, I have some idea. He said, your father had something to do with this. She said, yes. He did. He said, and I'll never forget this. He said, do you understand what your father has done to my family? She said, Garrick, he didn't do anything to your family. Your father did this to your family. My father just made a phone call. He started yelling. She hung up. She turned the phone off. Then she sat at my kitchen table and she cried for about an hour, and I didn't say anything. I just sat with her, the way Helen would have wanted me to. Sam was asleep on the couch under an old Afghan. I'm going to tell you the rest faster, because the rest is a kind of grinding that took months, and it isn't really what this story is about. Spencer was indicted on 12 counts: money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, 2 counts of obstruction. The principal subjects in the larger investigation were indicted 3 weeks later. The case was big enough that it ran on the financial pages for a month. Spencer's lawyers tried for a plea. The U.S. Attorney's Office wasn't interested. They had the documents, they had the wires, they had a cooperator they'd been sitting on for 6 months. He went to trial in May. He was convicted on 9 of 12 counts. He got 11 years federal, no parole, and a forfeiture order that took most of what he owned, including the compound on Long Island. Garrick was not indicted. He claimed, plausibly, that he hadn't known. The Bureau looked at his books for a long time and didn't find what they needed to charge him, but the firm couldn't survive the association. The big LPs pulled out within 90 days. By the end of the year, Holloway Bridge Partners didn't exist. He was 36 and unemployed, and the name on his door was poison in every office on the seaboard. He filed for divorce in June. Caroline filed a counter petition the same week. The custody fight was ugly for about 4 weeks, and then his lawyer told him quietly that fighting Caroline on Sam was going to surface things he didn't want surfaced, and he agreed to joint legal, primary physical, with Caroline. He gets every other weekend. He's used about half of them. Caroline and Sam moved into a rental in Fairfield in the fall. It's a small house. It has a yard. Sam has a swing set. Caroline went back to fundraising for a hospital, a different one this time. She likes it. She says she missed it more than she realized. I see them 3 or 4 times a week now. I drive up to Fairfield, or they come down to Westport. Sam is doing well. He was in therapy for a while, which was Caroline's idea, and I think it was the right one. He still plays chess. The knight got fixed. Wood glue, a small clamp, a steady hand. You can see the seam if you know where to look. I don't think it diminishes the piece. I think it makes it a better piece. I want to tell you one more thing, because if I don't, this story doesn't finish. About 4 months after the indictment, before the trial, Spencer asked, through his lawyer, to meet with me. I almost didn't go. Caroline thought I shouldn't. Kurt thought I shouldn't. I went anyway. It was at the federal courthouse in Brooklyn, in a small visitor's room. He'd lost weight. His hair was thinner. He was wearing a suit that didn't fit anymore. He said, "You did this." I said, "No. You did this." I just made a phone call. He said, "Who are you really?" I said, "I'm Sam's grandfather." He looked at me for a long time. He said, "You let me think you were a nobody." I said, "I let you think what you wanted to think. That's on you." He said, "I have a question. I'd like an honest answer." I waited. He said, "If I hadn't broken the chess piece, if I hadn't said what I said about your father, would you have made the call?" I thought about it. I wanted to give him an honest answer because I thought I owed it to myself, not to him. I said, "I don't know. Maybe not that night. Maybe never." "But you were going to give me a reason eventually, Spencer. Men like you always give people like me a reason. You just pick which night it's going to be." He didn't say anything. The guard came in and took him back. I haven't seen him since. Here's the part I want to leave you with. A week ago, I was at the rental house in Fairfield. Sam was at the kitchen table doing his homework. Caroline was making spaghetti. The radio was on low. Sam looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "What did you really do when you worked?" Caroline froze with the wooden spoon in her hand. I sat down across from him. I said, "I worked for the government. I helped the government catch people who were stealing money in ways that hurt other people. Sometimes I had to pretend to be other things to do my job. So if anyone ever asks you, you can say your grandfather worked for the Treasury Department, and that's the truth." "Okay?" He nodded. He thought about it. Then he said, like Grandpa Spencer. I said, like Grandpa Spencer was supposed to be caught. Yes. He said, did you catch him? I said, I made a phone call. The people who do the catching did the catching. He thought about that. He went back to his homework. About a minute later, without looking up, he said, that's a good job, Grandpa. Caroline turned her face toward the stove so we wouldn't see her cry. I want to say something now to whoever is listening to this. I am not a violent man. I am not a vengeful man. For 31 years, I worked inside a system that doesn't always work the way it should. And I learned that you don't fix things by yelling, and you don't fix things by throwing punches. You fix things by knowing what you know, by waiting for the right moment, and by making the right call to the right person. I let a man insult me for 2 years because my daughter loved his son. I let him talk down to me in his own house and at restaurants and at our wedding, and across a table I'd brought wine to. I let it happen because I told myself it didn't matter what he thought of me. But the night he made my grandson cry over a chess piece my father carved, the night my daughter looked at the floor, and my son-in-law looked at his phone, and a drunk 72-year-old man told an 8-year-old boy that he was being raised soft. That was the night I stopped letting things happen. People will tell you that the strongest men are the loud ones, the ones who fill the room, the ones with the watches and the speeches and the head of the table, even when it isn't their table. I'm here to tell you those aren't the strong ones. Those are the men who've never had to be quiet in their lives, and so they don't know what quiet can do. I'll tell you what quiet can do. Quiet can sit through a dinner. Quiet can carry a casserole dish to a foyer where no one takes their earbuds out. Quiet can listen and remember, and notice the way a child walks up his own staircase. Quiet can hold a broken piece of wood in a closed hand and walk to the bathroom and dial a number it hasn't dialed in 3 years. Quiet is what arrives at your door at 11:20 in the morning with a warrant. If you are someone like me, if you're 60 or 70 and you spent your whole life letting other people fill the room, I want you to hear this. You are not nobody. You never were. The things you know, you know. The people who love you, love you. And if a moment comes when somebody you love needs you to stop being polite, you'll know it when it comes. You won't have to think about it. My name is Edmund Caro. I have a daughter named Caroline and a grandson named Sam. I keep a chess set on my coffee table that has a knight with a hairline seam under the mane. We play on Sunday afternoons now. Sam still beats me about half the time. He's getting better. He's going to be very, very good. I've thought about that night a lot since then. Not the part where the FBI knocked on Spencer Holloway's door. That part takes care of itself in my memory. The part I keep returning to is earlier in the evening, when my grandson Sam set a pawn down on the chessboard and then picked it up again, because he wasn't sure where it went anymore. He'd known where a pawn went since he was 6, but a grown man had been making him feel small all night, and his hands had stopped trusting themselves. That's the thing nobody tells you about cruelty. It doesn't always come at you with a fist. Sometimes it comes at you over a dinner table with brandy in its hand, and it makes a child forget what he already knows. And a child who forgets what he knows once will forget it again and again until one day he stops being the boy who beats his grandfather at chess. That's how it works. That's the cause and the effect. Spencer didn't break a piece of wood that night. He was trying to break something inside Sam. The wood was just where he put his hand. I sat in that bathroom and I asked myself a question I think every decent person eventually has to ask. What good is it to have done a hard job your whole life if, when the moment comes, you don't use what you learned? I had spent 31 years learning when to wait and when to move, and I had been sitting at Garrick Holloway's table for 2 years telling myself it wasn't the moment yet, because my daughter loved her husband and I didn't want to be a problem. That was cowardice dressed up as patience. There's a difference. I had to learn that at 68, which is too late to learn it, but better than never. If I have anything to pass on to a younger man listening to this, it's 3 things, and they're plain. The first is that being decent is not the same as being silent. You can be the kindest man in the room and still know when to stand up. Caroline taught me that one. The night she told her husband on speakerphone that her father had only made a phone call. The second is that knowledge is a quiet kind of strength, and you don't owe it to anyone to put it on display. Spencer thought I was a desk worker because I let him think it. He showed me who he was because of what he thought I wasn't. The third is that the right thing rarely feels right while you're doing it. Helen used to tell me that, and she was correct about most things, and she was correct about that one. Sam still plays chess with me. The night is glued back together. There's a seam under the main. If you know to look for it, I tell him the seam doesn't make the piece weaker. It makes it a piece that's been through something and still works. I want him to understand that about himself someday, when he needs to.